It's back, but it's good to be here this morning. We're going to be looking at John, the 12th chapter. And if you are familiar with the Gospel of John, the Gospel of John has a lot of teaching and action up front. And then right here in about 12, it starts to make that transition to Holy Week. So almost half the book is what happens at Holy Week and afterwards. It's a little more compact in other books, but here you have so much more detail of what has happened. And the word for the day is the hour has come. For so long, Jesus has told them the hour has not yet come. I don't recommend you doing this when your mother asks you to do something or your wife asks you to do something, responding, "Woman, what does that have to do with me?" That is probably not your best response. "Woman, what does that have to do with me? My hour has not yet come." And Jesus does that at the very beginning at the wedding of Cana. But what does he do? He does it anyway. I just want to be clear about that. And then his brothers are talking to him about doing something. And in the 7th chapter, and he says, "You go up to the feast. I'm not going up to the feast, for my time has not yet fully come." And then later in the 7th chapter, they're trying to arrest Jesus. They're trying to lay hands on him. And we're told a couple times in chapter 7 and chapter 8, no one lays a hand on Jesus because his hour has not yet come when he's teaching the temple courts. And then again, and you remember from a couple weeks ago, why would he have problems in the temple courts? Because he cleared the temple courts at one time, right? So now he's teaching in the same temple courts that he has cleared earlier in the story in the Gospel of John. And so finally, no one is able to arrest him because his hour has not yet come. And then we get to the beginning of our text for this week. Here we go. Now, among those who went up to the worship at the festival were some Greeks. I don't know about you, but this is what it takes me to. Greeks worshiping at the festival. Anybody been to the Greek festival over here on not on Ponce? It's on Claremont. Yes, and it's a great tradition. One of my favorite things about being there is they have a wonderful timeline of the progression of the Christian church. And I was always taught, the Christian church begins, and that is the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church. And then the Orthodox Church splits off the Roman Catholic Church. And that's the timeline I'd always seen. But if you've ever been to the Greek Orthodox Church, they have the timeline where the Roman Catholic Church splits off them. It's just perfect. I mean, here's Orthodoxy, and I'd never seen that before, but right there on the wall, and I'll just remember that waiting in line at the Greek festival. So what festival are we talking about, friends? Anybody know what festival we're talking about? Not the Greek festival, the Passover festival, the festival of Passover. The festival of Passover, and this year Passover isn't until April 22nd. It's rather late this year. The Passover begins on the 15th day of the month of Nisan, which at present falls between March 26th and April 25th of the Gregorian calendar. The 15th day begins in the evening. After the 14th day, the Seder meal is eaten that evening, and the Passover is a spring festival, so it typically begins on the night of the full moon after the northern vernal equinox. Got it? Okay. However, due to the leap months falling after the vernal equinox, Passover sometimes starts on the second full moon after the vernal equinox. There have been some people who argue, we have a day for Christmas, it's the 25th of December, that we should pick, the second weekend of April is always Easter. But it's all tied to the moon, it's tied to the calendar, it's tied to spring, and it is always moving and always changing. My son turned 30 this week, and we got to celebrate his birthday on Sunday evening watching the Pelicans beat the Hawks, which was really kind of fun. And he runs a Twitter feed that for about the Pelicans, and he tweeted something about one of the Pelicans players. He had done something that wasn't great, and so he got a call from one of the Pelicans players asking him to take it down. So he immediately took it down. Brandon Ingram, any basketball fans in here? So Brandon Ingram contacted my son, and so he took it down. And then the head of PR from the Pelicans called and said, would you take that down? One of our players said something he shouldn't have, and you clipped it and put it up on the internet. And he said, I've already taken it down. And the guy said, well, what can we do for you? And he said, I'd love to come see the Pelicans play on my birthday. And so done. So we had 4 tickets almost on the floor that the Pelicans gave us on the tunnel. And it was really fun to be able to be there and to enjoy that with my son. But when he turns 40, Mardi Gras is going to be his birthday. So he's got plans for 10 years from now that Mardi Gras is his birthday. And that's almost as late as Mardi Gras can be, the 9th of March. So imagine how late Easter is going to be that year. So it's always different, makes it difficult to plan as a church, as it swings so differently. It's so early this year in March, and it's at the end of April next year, right, David? It's April 21st, April 20th next year. And David and I hope to leave that night or the next morning for Turkey and Greece, the travels of Paul. So if anybody would like to join us, we are hoping to leave Easter evening or the next morning to head to Turkey. So here we have what happens in our scripture passage for this week. Now among them who went up to worship at the festival were some Greeks. They came to Philip. Why to Philip? Well, Philip is a Greek name, and perhaps it means lover of horses. In the film that we talked about this week, I talked about how all the names were important, and my parents named me lover of horses. I think they just needed a P. My brother was Paul David Schroeder. My dad was Paul Daniel Schroeder, and they wanted PDS, so they just picked up Philip, not thinking about what the name means. But they came to Philip, who was from Bethsaida in Galilee. It was kind of a half Greek, half Israeli town. They spoke both languages there, and they said to him, "Sir, we wish to see Jesus." And I'll probably talk about it on Sunday, but many times when you're going to their pulpits across the country where someone has made a plaque or someone has written on a piece of paper or someone has etched it into the wood of the pulpit, they have put those words, "Sir, we wish to see Jesus," so that the pastor, the preacher, knows that that's their role, that their role is to show Jesus to others. John Ray got to be our preacher this morning. Thank you for your devotional this morning and helping us all to see Jesus better. But I just thought that was an interesting thing that the pulpits say, "Sir, we want to see Jesus." And Philip and Andrew, another Greek name, Philip went to Andrew, then Andrew and Philip went and told Jesus. And I'm not really sure why, Philip couldn't do this himself, but Philip went and told Andrew, and then the two of them went and told Jesus. So I asked the question, why might it be significant that some Greeks want to see Jesus at this particular moment? That's one of the questions that is out there for today. And the thing that it reminded me of is this old commercial. Do you remember this one? Anybody? Can you hit that? Heather Locklear, part of the Lumbee Indian tribe.
Pure wheat germ oil and honey. It was so good, I told 2 friends about it, and they told 2 friends, and so on, and so on, and so on. And believe me, there's still nothing like the original Fabergé Organic. It gives me super shine, super body. Super fresh smelling. Try it, and you'll tell your friends about it, and they'll tell their friends, and so on, and so on. Be sure and get the original Fabergé Organic shampoo and conditioner with pure wheat germ oil and honey.
Anybody remember that? Is it just me? You remember her? Thank you. Okay, that's so helpful. She's the Locklears are part of the Lumbee Indian tribe in North Carolina. They're our lay leader from North Carolina who died of COVID was a Locklear, Gary Locklear, just a part of that tribe and part of that family. And many of them were wonderful Methodists. The Methodist Church had reached out to the Lumbee tribe a long time ago, and many of them were wonderful Methodists. So I'm guessing Heather Locklear was a Methodist. I don't have proof of that. But the idea that he goes and tells Philip and they get 2 more friends. And if you just told 2 friends, if you doubled every day, I think in a year you have 375 quadrillion people who you've connected to 365 days of doubling. But they had to Bethsaida. You're ahead of me. This is a kind of where Dunwoody is and the Sea of Galilee, sort of on the north end, just past on the top end of the perimeter, just to the right of the river going north. So there you have Bethsaida, and it was certainly a crossroads. It was certainly a place where people of different cultures were getting together. And who are these Greeks? The Greeks, who are the God-fearers, is the term that is used over and over again. These were people who were observing the Jewish rites and rituals, the traditions, but they didn't become full Jews. They may have been drawn to God and the Jews, or have an affinity for God's people. And this is the chart that kind of helps me, is that in the very center are the Jews. These are people who are born Jewish, they're practicing Jews, they follow the Jewish faith. And then there are proselytes, then there are proselytes, who are people who have found something compelling about the God of the Hebrew people, and they have converted. So how did they convert? Circumcision. Okay, so the proselytes would have been not just following the rituals of Judaism, they would have followed the tradition, and they would have been circumcised. And then the God-fearers are people who find the God of the Hebrew people compelling, but they have not fully converted, as it were. And these are people who were certainly open to the message of Jesus, and are talked about in the book of Acts as people who are open. So God-fearers are non-Jews, while proselytes have actually become Jews, and then the Gentiles were the people beyond that. But we need to ask ourselves, what are the events that precede this passage in John's gospel, and how do they set the stage for the later conversation that occurs? So just a little review, I think, is in order. Right before this, in chapter 11, Lazarus has died. The death of Lazarus occurs, and they come and they tell Jesus about the death of Lazarus. And what does Jesus do? He raises him, but after a little time. He doesn't rush off. Do you remember that? He doesn't rush off to be helpful. He takes his time, and he finally gets there, has a conversation with Lazarus's sisters, and he speaks and says, I am the resurrection and I am life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, yet shall they live. And then Jesus weeps for Lazarus, and perhaps for us and for himself, because there's a sense in the Gospel of John that this is the linchpin. This is the thing that when he does this, it sort of is an accelerant, and it moves us toward the end, because the Messiah was to resurrect the dead. And here we have Jesus resurrecting the dead. Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead, and they have this conversation about this passage, whether it's resurrection or resuscitation. Anybody know the difference between resurrection and resuscitation? What's that? Are you pronounced dead in one? No, that's a good, I like that idea though.
If you're resuscitated, you're going to die.
If you're resuscitated, you're going to die again. If you're resurrected, you don't die again. And there are even stories of Lazarus not dying again and going to France. Okay, so there's a sense that that, like heaven, depending on what you think of France, it could be heaven. But I know some of you are learning French and getting ready for that, right, Brian? So you're getting ready for that heavenly time there in France. But yes, very good. I'm glad you're working on that. But resurrection means that you don't die again. Resuscitation means that you would die again. And so they have all these debates about whether Lazarus was resurrected or Lazarus was resuscitated. But it becomes a problem, because this is what happens next. Many of the Jews, therefore, had come with Mary and had seen what Jesus did and believed in him because of the resurrection of Lazarus, or the raising of Lazarus, whatever you want to call it. But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. So they go and they tattle to the Pharisees that Jesus has raised the dead. And this becomes threatening to them. So here's your piece of irrelevant trivia for today. The word tattletale is a U.S. word. In Britain, they don't say tattletale. they call it telltale. You are a telltale. It comes from the verb tattle, meaning to report someone's wrongdoing. And in the 16th century, you were also called a pickthank. Pickthank. Isn't that a great word? I know that's a word you probably needed for today. Pickthank. So if the children or grandchildren are tattletales, you can call them a pickthank. And today we use words like snitch and whistleblower. But the plot to kill Jesus. So the chief priests and the Pharisees called a meeting of the council and said, what are we going to do? This man is performing signs, raising the dead. This is a sign of the Messiah. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him. And the Romans will come and destroy both our holy place and our nation. But Caiaphas says, you don't know anything. You do not understand that it's better for one man to die for the people than to have a whole nation destroyed. He didn't say this on his own, but being high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus was about to die for the nation. So from that day on, they planned to put him to death. And it's not a new story. I mean, it's an old story. It's the same old story. What can you do to eliminate your rivals? People were starting to follow Jesus and not to follow the people there in the temple. And so you have to eliminate your rivals. And what does Jesus do at this point? Does anybody remember? Anybody remember what Jesus does at this point? He heads for the hills. He heads for the hills. I don't think a lot of people remember this, but Jesus therefore no longer walked about openly among the enemies of Jesus, but went from there to a town called Ephraim in the region near the wilderness, and he remained there with the disciples. So he heads for the hills and takes some time away in the midst of this controversy. You can see perhaps where, there we go. There's Jerusalem here, Bethlehem is below it, and Ephraim is up here in the hill country. You can kind of see it a little better here. You've got Bethany where he goes next, and it's just north of Jerusalem up here in the hill country, and he takes some time away with his disciples, probably preparing them even more, sharing some final teaching, but we don't have a lot of words about that because pretty soon the Passover of the Jews was near and many went up to Jerusalem and they're looking for Jesus. They're asking one another, what do you think? Surely he will come to this. He won't come to the festival. Now the chief priests and the Pharisees had given orders that anyone who knew where Jesus was should let them know so that they could arrest him. They're looking for him there on the red carpet during that time. And then we see Jesus coming to Bethany where he's anointed by Mary, and he's anointed, and there's that conversation with Judas about, should have this been saved for the poor, but he didn't really care about the poor. And then that's where he goes to Bethany. So he's gone to Ephraim and then to Bethany. And then there's a plot to kill Lazarus. Why do they want to kill Lazarus? Yeah, he's the proof. You got to get rid of the proof. I mean, if Jesus is raising the dead and he's dead again, then, you've eliminated the proof. So the great crowd of the Jews learned that he was there. They came not only because of Jesus, but also to see Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. So the chief priests are like, we're going to put Lazarus to death too, since it was on account of him that many were deserting the Jews and were believing in Jesus. And then we kind of get the story out of order, at least on Sunday mornings, because we're going to be dealing with this text on Sunday mornings, but then we get Palm Sunday. And Palm Sunday occurs, and then we have to kind of go backwards to get forwards. This is Jesus' triumphal entry into Jerusalem. And this key verse is verse 19. Would you read that with me? The Pharisees then said to one another, you see, you can do nothing. Look, the world has gone after him. And so that is what happens at the end of last week. We go backwards to move forward. And then this week, the Greeks have come after him. So you see what happens. Look, the world has gone after him. Not only are the Hebrew people beginning to believe in Jesus, but some Greeks come inquiring about who Jesus is. And that brings us to our text for this week. That gives you more background than you wanted, but hopefully it's helpful because the Gospel of John is so complex. Now, among those who went up to worship at the festival were some Greeks. They came to see Philip, who was from Bethsaida in Galilee, and said to him, "Sir, we wish to see Jesus." So now the world is seeking after him. The larger known world is looking to see Jesus. Philip went and told Andrew. Then Andrew and Philip went to see Jesus. And then Jesus answered them, "The hour has come. The hour has come." And part of the reason the hour has come is because Jesus has raised someone from the dead, and that starts everything in motion. And the others is that he's trying to expand the gift of good news beyond just the Hebrew people. And when the Greeks come to see him, the Greeks coming to see him is yet another sign of this worldview expanding. And it's an expansion of Jesus' own worldview as he has grown up in that society and probably had not traveled out into the larger Greek world. But now that other people from outside are coming to find out and to know more about him. So Jesus answered him, "Okay, the hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. Very truly, I tell you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains just a single grain. But if dies, it bears much fruit. Those who love their life lose it, and those who hate their life in this world will keep it for eternal life." It's interesting, for me, some people want to be literalists. They never talk about this verse as literal. That's not a verse that they really want to be literal. People who love their life will lose it, and those who hate their life in this world will keep it for eternal life. Because I think many of us love our lives that we have, at least most of our lives. But here's a word for those who hate their life in this world will keep it. But hopefully it's not the same life, right? "Whoever serves me must follow me, and where I am, there my servant will be also." We're being called to a life of serving, and whoever serves me, the Father will honor. It's one of the things I said Sunday, that I find when I'm serving, there's a lot less complaining in me. And I love this little chart of the growth of the seed. You have the seed, and then it creates a radical. So the seed bursts open, and it bursts open with a radical. A radical bursts it open, and then it gets some hypocotyl and some root hairs. It starts to put down roots as it also grows, and then it continues to grow. The hypocotyl is a germinating seedling stem found underneath the seed leaves, but above the root. It tends to grow in response to light stimulation. And what does it mean to die to self? And I think we saw that this past weekend with Nathan dying to self. Is Nathan here this morning? I don't know if you knew this, but Nathan Sparks chose to be baptized. And when I asked him when he wanted to be baptized, he talked about how important this group was to him. And he chose to be baptized on our retreat because of what this has meant to him and the learning that he has done here. And for me, that's what it means for a seed to humble themselves, to die and to put themselves into the ground so that they can bear fruit for others. And now he speaks about his death. He says, "My soul is troubled, and what should I say? Father, save me from this hour. Take this hour away from me." And this is where I wish the Bible had extra carriage returns, because for me, it seems like he does this in a moment. "Now my soul is troubled. What should I say? Father, save me from this hour." I think there's hours of fervent prayer in between this question mark and the word no. I think this is a struggle. I think this is pain. This is not someone who says, "Father, save me from this hour," and then immediately says, "No, it is for this reason that I've come to this hour." It is honest struggle and pain. And then he says, "Father, glorify your name." And then a voice came from heaven. One of the other times that voices come from heaven, folks. Baptism, Jesus' baptism. "This is my son, with you I am well pleased." Transfiguration is another time when it happens in the New Testament. Transfiguration. And some would say this is the transfiguration in the Gospel of John. There is no up to the mountain alone with the three disciples in the Gospel of John. And so this voice coming from heaven is like the voice coming from the cloud in the transfiguration. Father, glorify your name. And a voice came from heaven. I have glorified it, and I will glorify it again. Pay attention. So the crowd standing there heard it and said it was thunder. Others said an angel spoke to him. And then, but Jesus answered, the voice has come for your sake and not for mine. Now is the judgment of this world. Now the ruler of this world will be driven out. And when I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all people to myself. And so it echoes again, that snake being lifted in the wilderness to bring healing. Now he's saying it when I am hypsothene, when I am exalted, but also when I'm physically lifted up from the earth, I will draw all people to myself. And he said this to indicate the kind of death that he was going to die. So we have some questions for you to think about. And those questions are these. It sounds like a lot of questions, but pick the ones you like. What are you lifting up the most each day? How is Lent going for you? Why does it seem so difficult for Jesus' own family members to accept who he is and what he is called to do? Both his mother and his brothers try to get him to do things that he's not willing to do yet. Jesus speaks of a grain of wheat falling into the ground and dying to bear much fruit. What does this concept of dying to self mean to you? That can tie into Lent. What does Jesus mean when he says, whoever serves me must follow me, and where I am, there my servant will be also? How does this challenge our conventional notions of leadership and service? And Jesus speaks openly about his death and glorification. How do these words serve to prepare his own disciples for what is to come? And I really like to think of that time in Ephraim as him trying to prepare the disciples. And then Jesus talks about his soul being troubled. What have you felt troubled or conflicted about something in your life, and how did you handle it? So pick 2 or 3 and discuss among yourselves. Thanks for listening this morning.